So I'm going to turn it over to Nave right now for a little case study.
Thanks, Astrid. So I'm going to show you two really cool ways that people have actually used data in real life. The images you see on the left-hand side of your screen are from a bakery at a rest stop in Japan. So in 2007, a bakery owner realized that overall sales in his bakery had actually increased when there were more variety of products. So as a result, he increased his offerings to around 200 different baked goods, right? Most of these items were placed in either plastic wrap or in little plastic boxes, and there were some items which were just left unwrapped. The bakery owner then realized that the items that were in boxes and that were wrapped weren't selling as well as the items that weren't wrapped. So he did some feedback. He asked his customers, why are you buying this rather than that? And the general consensus was that there was a perception that the items that were not wrapped were fresher. So this put the bakery owner in a really awkward position because he had two options here. Either he could reduce the number of offerings and therefore reduce the amount of revenue he was earning, or he will need to train his cashiers to recognize each one of the 200 different items in the bakery so that they would know which code to put into the checkout system. And the reason why this was necessary was because if the food wasn't wrapped, there was no place for the barcodes. So instead of opting for the situation where everyone had to remember 200 different items, he developed an alternate solution. He worked with a data management company called Brainco, and together they developed a system that took them 5 years. And this system was very, very intuitive, something like no one had ever seen before. A customer would walk in, select what they wanted from the bakery, put it onto their tray, walk up to the little white, if you can see that white square on the screen, put it on that item, on that square, and the square would use photos from a camera up top, lasers right next to the camera, and the entire white pad to determine what the source or what the actual item was. So it started off by looking at the general shape. So if it was a round bun, it would eliminate all non-round items. Then it would use lasers to measure the diameter of the bun. Anything which is bigger or smaller than what the laser had measured was immediately eliminated. Finally, it used the white light at the bottom for light disbursement to very, very accurately predict what item this was. They would then display the price, and the cashier's job was very simple. Bag the item, take the money from the customer, and the customer was on their way. Now, this might sound like a lot of mumbo jumbo, but let's give it a try, right? Over here on the right-hand side of the screen is a system called the Akinator. Now, I'm going to need a volunteer for that part. Could I get one person to volunteer, please? All right, Dina, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dina.
Okay, so Dina, you're going to need to unmute yourself for this part, yeah?
Okay.
Okay, cool. So, Dina, I need you to think of a real or fictional character, and the Akinator system is going to guess who it is. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. So, are you thinking of a character, an object, or an animal?
Character.
Character, cool. Is your character a girl?
No.
No. Is your character a real person?
No.
Is your character in anime?
No.
Is your character from a game?
No.
Does your character wear shoes?
Probably. Yes.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Does your character have special powers?
Yes.
Is your character a superhero?
No.
Is your character bad?
No.
Is your character in Harry Potter?
No.
Your character lived for over 100 years?
Yeah.
Is your character a vampire?
Yes.
Did your character go to school?
Yes.
Did your character do a cover of Space Oddity?
No.
Is your character from a TV series?
Nope.
Character played a piano.
Yeah.
Is it
Yes.
So this
Team
is a
effort for life.
but yeah, so this is a really simple example of how data can be used to give a result where it's not expected. So if you're looking at this little button right here, asking, is it error content? I'm gonna click yes. And what this does is it enforces the system's understanding that in this series of questions, you will get a positive response. That right there is called machine learning, by the way. It's that simple.
What data is exactly? There's a lot of misunderstanding around the term data. Like, what does that mean exactly? Data basically has multiple stages to it, right? And you start off essentially from the left-hand side of the screen where you have raw data, and you end up at it in its most advanced form, which is insights on the right-hand side. So for this, let's imagine a scenario, right? Let's imagine a toy store. And if you're running a toy store, what are the types of data that essentially you're going to have? At the first stage, you have raw data on the left-hand side of the screen, right? These things are, so raw data is essentially just a meaningless bunch of numbers and words. If you look at them in itself, none of it's going to actually make sense. So it could be things that are as complicated as an Excel sheet that's populated with thousands of rows and columns, or it could be as simple as the scribblings on your notepad when you're done with a meeting. So a lot of people are like, oh, data is something that lives in a computer and a database. That's not actually what data means. Data is any piece of like random collection of information. So if you finish the meeting and you've got a bunch of things written down, that sheet of paper is data. So here's the thing, if you're looking at the toy store example earlier, right, you would know single pieces of raw data from things like this. An example, I have a customer, his name is Dave. I have another customer, his name is John. That's another piece of data. I know that my store sells Hot Wheels racing tracks. I know that I sold something, I don't know what, but I know I sold something at 3:45 p.m. today. So each one of those things is a piece of raw data. And what you want to do is you basically want to refine that, right? So that's where we get to the second stage, which is information. Information is a collection of several pieces of raw data, and it's organized by its relationship. So essentially, you're putting together two different fields like transactions and users, for example. You would have seen information like most often in your life. Every time you've looked at an Excel sheet or a table or an organized list, that is now you're looking at information. You're not looking at raw data anymore. So this would be something like Toy Store example again. This is put things together. Dave bought a Hot Wheels racing track at 3:45 p.m. So that's a piece of information now. John, the other customer, bought a Malibu Barbie doll house at 6:10 p.m. So that's another piece of information. Now, what do you do with this, right? You take it to the next level. That's where we move another step to the right to analysis. Analysis is where you start to group the information by patterns and correlations. That's the keyword here, right? The patterns and correlations. And it's a good factual observation by itself, but it can still leave you with a question like, okay, but so what? You know, it doesn't really have much explaining behind it, but it does group relationships. I'll give you an example. So back to the same toy store, total sales are higher on Tuesdays compared to any other weekday. So that's a pattern. It's repetitive. Every Tuesday you sell more than any other day. Another one would be Hot Wheels racing tracks sell higher during pre-Christmas season. See, that's information because there is a pattern to it already. And then this is where we move to the right-hand side of the screen, which is insights, right? And insights, the difference is it's always actionable and it's predictive, it's forward-looking. So in the same example, you could say that your sales always increase 2 weeks before Christmas. That's a pretty good analysis already. Now you add, but this only happens for people with 2 or more children. So you're starting to add additional parameters so that you get this insight. So now you know that you can have a sale 2 weeks, and you should start the sale 2 weeks before Christmas. So these are the things you know, right? But you should be targeting people who have 2 or more children because that's where the money is, for example, in the toy store. Or, for example, the Hot Wheels cars, the small, like Hot Wheels or Matchbox cars, right? They sell better around the year. Basically, they're like seasonal. They're spread out throughout the year. Why? Because you'll find that the big presents tend to be year-end holiday season presents that are shared maybe among multiple children in the household. So customers will be buying things like big items like the Hot Wheels track for Christmas. But then when somebody passes their midterm exam, when there's a birthday party coming up, that's when they'll go and buy something smaller like a Hot Wheels car. So these are the insights that you need if you are, say, running a toy store, for example. For the avoidance of any confusion here, right, the main difference between analysis and insights, right, is how much of that eureka moment it triggers for you. Remember when it came to analysis, it was like, nice piece of information, fun fact, but so what, right? But the insights basically you can hand it to anyone and they'll immediately look at it and go like, oh yeah, I guess I should have a sale 2 weeks to Christmas, but I need to filter all my customers who have families. And if I know that, right, then I know who to send the mailers to, for example. Now, essentially, if you have been doing your job for a very long time, you would already be used to intuitive decision making. That's like, what they call experience and wisdom, right? Basically. So if you know that, you can actually do a lot with just analysis because you're actually pulling out the eureka moments by yourself. If you're handing information or if you're handing a data set or a report over to like senior management that's not too operationally inclined, or new staff, for example, you want to make sure you drill it all the way down to insights. This will make it actionable for them as well as ensure that there's no confusion, because the conclusion you came to from your years of experience may not be the same conclusion that junior staff come to when they see the same analysis, for example. So our intention in this presentation is to take you basically from here in red, and we hope to bring you here to green by the end of this presentation and, in the years that go on further than that. Okay, so let's move on from this and let's talk a little bit about who can benefit from using data. So remember the list of departments we had earlier, right? So can anyone benefit or just use their data? That's the first question, right? Can anybody just use the data in their organization? It depends a lot on where you sit in your org chart. And I imagine that we have people from all different levels and places in the org chart here today. But if you are like a solopreneur or your senior management, yes, there's a very high chance you can get like unfiltered access to all of your data. The most effective answer that we find, and this may require a little bit of like convincing the big bosses, right, is that everyone should be using the data. Let me take a minute to explain why. So on the screen, you'll see a chart that shows the traditional data and information flow in any large organization. So this is a very structured, big organization, a few hundred people work there, So you'll see it traditionally flows in one direction. In our example here, it flows down, 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 right? So it goes from the operations teams, it goes into a department that can be called data mart, data science, business intelligence. It's the data guys, basically, right? And then finally, it flows towards management. So the management takes that information and uses it to formulate a strategy, which they cascade back down to the line departments as instructions, like do this, change that, change the shift hours, put in more billboards, things like that, right? And finally, they cascade it back down. So anyway, a little bit of unrelated trivia here. So a lot of times when we give this presentation, people ask why the pyramid is upside down. That's the biggest question we always get. So at our company, we advocate for this concept called servant leadership. So in servant leadership, basically you build your processes starting with the people, and the management always support the needs of the line departments. If you've never heard this term before, you can head over to our blog later and you can read all about it. Back to the show. So if we were going to change one part of this data flow dynamic, right, it would be right here in the middle. That middle one-way arrow will change it to a two-way arrow. And why would we do that, right? The data science and operations teams should be talking to each other. And if you're in charge of a large organization, it doesn't work this way, you might want to consider taking it to the board to change this, right? Doing this will allow you to basically not just become a supplier of data as the operations department, but also a consumer of that data. It helps you make better decisions faster. And in doing that, you'll give senior management better intelligence overall. Talking a little bit about what can we do with all this data, right? What are some of the things you want to be able to do with this data? So you remember the line departments earlier? When you start combining the data from the line departments, right, you end up with broad categories. Things like sales data, which is basically sales plus your payables and your receivables department. You put all that together. Then there's like transaction and risk data. That's essentially when you start using operations, accounting data, and risk management data. You put it together, you have transaction data. You want all the sets if you can manage it, right? And then finally, you'll have CS and operations data, your fulfillment department, your shipping department, all the information from the POS systems if you have a physical store or a location, plus all the customer complaint data. You want to put those things together. Why? What are you going to do with it, right? So essentially, you want to be able to do that because you want to know, when do you want to launch a product? Is the particular product you're launching, is it seasonal or is it not? You want to know things like, I'll go to my personal favorite, which is the bottom right-hand corner, which is what are the scams like and how to differentiate your marketing. Let me give you an example. So if you speak to your risk and fraud department, or if you've got data on this that you've bought, for example, and you find out, for example, that you have scammers that are basically attacking your customers, right? And they're attacking them using like a lucky draw cash prize kind of thing. Like Chinese New Year is coming, so, like 1,888 ringgit ang pao. You can win this ang pao if you just, do 1, 2, 3 things. Basically, this is usually a phishing attack, right? Where they're trying to get your customers to expose their logins, their passwords, something. They're trying to attack your customers. So if you know that's what the trend is right now, and you find out that in your industry, that's what people are doing to attack your customers, the last thing you want to be doing is actually having a promotion that offers a cash prize in exchange for completing some actions, because how are your customers going to know the difference between the scam and your legitimate promotion? Or even worse yet, the reputational damage of them stating, because I saw your ad, I believed that scam and I went for it. This is now your fault. And it blows up on social media. So these are things you want to consider, and using the right types of data will make sure that you're protecting the investment that you make on your marketing.
So I'm going to just take everyone through a couple of slides, and we're going to start off with understanding the difference between items which are trendy and items which are trending. So one thing I have observed is that it's very common for people to use the term trending when describing something that is garnering a lot of attention at the moment, or something which has gone viral. However, these items aren't necessarily trending, they're rather trendy, right? Items which are trending, on the other hand, are items which normally follow a general direction of in which something is changing or developing. So I'm going to give you 2 examples. So first, let's take the Netflix show, The Queen's Gambit. Now, The Queen's Gambit was released on Netflix on the 23rd of October, 2020. Once that show was released, there was a massive surge of interest on Amazon.com for chess sets, and chess.com reportedly had a 300% increase in visitors and new account signups. Now, this lasted from October till about February, where they had an average about 47 million visitors per month. And since February, they've had about a 12% decrease overall. So we don't know whether chess sets are going to be going out of style, like the fidget spinner, like the hoverboard have, but we can assume, just based on the general lack or decreasing attention to chess, that these chess sets aren't going to be the biggest and most popular gift come Christmas this year, right? That's because this is an item which is trendy, not trending. However, let's look at Bitcoins. Now, there's been a lot of news recently about Bitcoins and the general prices, but we can use historical data to make a general statement that Bitcoin prices, an example of something which is trending. So this chart shows from 2015 to 2018 the general trend in Bitcoin prices. So you'll be able to pick up very easily that on the first half or the first quarter of the charts rather, there's always been a dip in Bitcoin prices. Now that coincides very, very neatly with the Chinese New Year celebration. And this makes sense as China is the biggest Bitcoin mining on the planet, and generally we will see people sell off coins or just cease mining operations during this Chinese New Year period. So coin prices will naturally drop. Now prices will then rally again and go upwards and onwards. Now this trend has been observed for the past 6 years. I know this chart's only giving us 4 years worth of data, but just to let you know, 2019, 2020, 2021 have all seen the exact same pattern. Right? So therefore we can conclude that Bitcoin and Bitcoin prices are an example of something which is trending, and this trend will continue in the future. So you might be wondering, why does any of this have anything to do with me and sales and data? It's because trendy items and trending items will need you to develop different marketing strategies. So if you are looking at something for short-term revenue growth, you're not going to be looking at using historical data, right? You're going to be looking at perhaps using an influencer, perhaps offering flash sales, right? Anything that can temporarily drive interest back to your business, because you know that doing that is not a viable long-term strategy. However, if you wanted to drive more long-term engagement or long-term interest in your business, you would need to consider reviewing actual historical data to understand what has previously driven interest in your product, and therefore you can utilize that same model and replicate those conditions.